Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The world was a place of darkness. An eternal night stretched across the land, casting every corner into shadow, while the moon hovered like an indifferent sentinel, its cold light bathing everything in a pale, deathly glow. The dark elves, twisted creatures who drew their strength from the moon and stars, ruled over humanity with an iron grip. They had driven men, women, and children into hiding, forcing them to live in fear, to forget what daylight was, and to dream only of survival. Cain was no stranger to this nightmare. He had lived his entire life under the tyranny of the dark elves, surviving in the wilderness by sheer will and cunning. The sky above had been blanketed in darkness for so long that the sun was nothing more than a distant legend passed down through whispers, but Cain believed in that legend. It was what kept him going on the coldest, darkest nights when the shadows seemed alive with eyes that watched him from the trees. A skilled hunter, Cain had spent years studying the elves, watching their movements, observing their habits. He had seen how they manipulated the night, how they bent the very fabric of darkness to their will. But it wasn't until he began tracking the phases of the moon that he noticed something peculiar. The dark elves were not invincible. They had a weakness, one tied to the cycles of the moon itself. It came to him one night as he crouched in the underbrush, watching a patrol of elves move silently through the forest. They glided effortlessly, their bodies almost melding with the shadows, but Cain had noticed a slight change in their behavior. Their movements were slower, less fluid. It was the night of the new moon, and for the first time, Cain realized that the absence of moonlight diminished their power. His heart had raced with the thrill of discovery. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the dark recesses of his mind. The elves could be fought. They could be defeated. But it would take more than just brute strength. It would take strategy, patience, and timing. Cain returned to his camp, a small enclave of humans living in the ruins of an ancient city, hidden deep within the forest. There, he began to lay out his plan, gathering together those who still had the fire to fight. Among them was Lena, a woman whose family had been slaughtered by the dark elves. Her bow skills were unmatched, and her thirst for revenge was palpable. Yarek, the blacksmith, had been one of the few to resist the dark elves in the early days. His hands were scarred from the forge, but they were steady and sure when crafting blades, weapons designed to cut through the elves' enchanted armor. He had long since given up hope of defeating them, but Cain's discovery reignited the flames of his old resolve. Then there was Evo, a former soldier who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. He had once led men into battle, but after the fall of the great cities, he became a shadow of his former self. Yet, beneath his hardened exterior, the old tactician remained. Cain gathered them in a makeshift war room, a crumbling stone hall lit by flickering candles. The air was thick with tension, but Cain's voice was steady as he laid out the details of his plan. "We strike during the new moon," Cain began, his voice low but firm. "That's when their power is weakest. We don't have the numbers to fight them head-on, but if we can infiltrate their stronghold and destroy the Moonshadow Crystal, we can end this." Lena raised an eyebrow. "The Moonshadow Crystal? Are you sure it even exists?" Cain nodded. "I've seen it with my own eyes. It's the source of their power, the thing that keeps the night from ever ending. Without it, they lose their hold on the darkness." Yarek grunted. "Sounds simple enough, but how do we even get close?" "The elves guard their territory with more than just magic." Cain pointed to a crude map on the table. "We'll approach from the east, through the dense forests. Their patrols are lighter there, and we can use the shadows to our advantage. Once we're inside, we move quickly. Evo, you'll lead the attack on the outer defenses. Lena and I will find the crystal." The room fell silent as the enormity of the task sank in. They were a small group, barely more than a handful of fighters, yet they were about to embark on a mission that could change the fate of humanity. Yarrick broke the silence. "Well, I suppose if we're going to die, we might as well make it count." Cain allowed himself a brief smile. "We're not dying. We're taking back the light." The journey into the heart of darkness began under a moonless sky. Cain and his small band of warriors moved like shadows through the dense forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick undergrowth. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of branches as nocturnal creatures stirred. As they ventured deeper into enemy territory, the psychological strain of eternal night began to take its toll. Lena was the first to speak up, her voice barely a whisper. "How do they live like this?" she muttered. "No light, no warmth, it's suffocating." Cain didn't answer immediately. He knew what she meant. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, swallowing them whole. It was easy to lose track of time, to forget the feel of sunlight on your skin, the warmth of a fire. But Cain had learned to use the darkness, to let it guide him rather than consume him. "They thrive on it," Cain finally replied. "It's what makes them strong." Ivo grunted from behind. "We'll see how strong they are when we cut that crystal down." The group pressed on, their resolve hardened by the knowledge that this could be their last chance to strike. Every step took them closer to the Dark Elves' citadel, a towering structure hidden deep within the forest. It was said that the citadel had been built from the bones of the earth itself, a place where the elves had once communed with ancient forces long before humanity had risen. After days of traveling, they reached the outskirts of the Dark Elves' territory. The citadel loomed in the distance, its spires reaching toward the heavens like jagged claws. Moonlight bathed the structure in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Cain knew they had to move carefully now. The elves' patrols would be more vigilant this close to their stronghold. They crouched in the shadows, watching as a small group of dark elves passed by, their silver armor glinting in the moonlight. Cain held his breath, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the elves had moved far enough away, he signaled to his team. "Now," Cain whispered. They moved quickly, silently, slipping through the shadows like wraiths. Ivo took the lead, his sword at the ready as they approached the citadel's outer defenses. The guards were fewer than expected, their movements sluggish, just as Cain had predicted. The new moon was sapping their strength, making them vulnerable. Yarrick, wielding one of his specially crafted blades, took down the first guard with a swift strike. Lena loosed an arrow, and another elf crumpled to the ground without a sound. The rest of the team followed suit, dispatching the remaining guards with precision and efficiency. Cain led them deeper into the citadel, navigating the labyrinth of corridors and stairways with a hunter's instinct. The air inside was cold, almost freezing, and the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very stones were alive with dark magic. They reached a massive door at the heart of the citadel, intricately carved with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the dark. Cain felt his pulse quicken. Beyond this door lay the Moonshadow Crystal, the source of the Dark Elves' power and the key to their downfall. He motioned for Ivo to step forward. The soldier studied the runes for a moment before nodding. "It's a lock, but nothing we can't handle." With a practiced hand, Ivo began to work on the lock, his movements swift and sure. Cain felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of years of planning, of countless hours spent in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from the corridor behind them. Cain's heart pounded as the faint sound echoed down the corridor. His hand tightened around the hilt of his blade, every muscle tensed for action. He exchanged a glance with Lena, whose sharp eyes scanned the shadows. Ivo continued to work on the lock, his face a mask of concentration. The sound came again, closer this time. Kane's instincts screamed at him to move, to run, but they were too close to stop now. He motioned for the others to stay still, and slowly, silently, he crept toward the source of the noise. His boots barely made a sound on the cold stone floor as he moved, his eyes fixed on the darkened corridor ahead. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged, another dark elf, patrolling the halls. Kane held his breath, waiting for the elf to pass. The elf's steps were slow, methodical, and Kane could see the weariness in his posture. The new moon was sapping their strength just as he had hoped. Still, if the elf raised the alarm, their mission would be over before it began. Kane's muscles coiled like a spring. He stepped forward, quick as lightning, his blade flashing in the dim light. Before the elf could react, Kane's knife was at his throat, and with a swift, practiced motion, the elf crumpled to the ground, dead before he even hit the floor. Kane dragged the body into the shadows, his heart still racing. Behind him, Ivo let out a soft grunt of satisfaction as the door gave way. The ancient runes flickered once before fading into nothing. Kane sheathed his blade and moved back to the group. The door creaked open, revealing a massive chamber beyond, bathed in an unnatural, pale light. At its center, suspended on a platform of jagged stone, was the moonshadow crystal. The crystal glowed with a cold, ethereal light, its surface swirling with shifting shadows. It was larger than Kane had imagined, nearly as tall as a man and pulsing with energy. The air around it hummed with power, and even from the doorway, Kane could feel the magic radiating from it. This was the source of the eternal night, the heart of the dark elves' control over the world. Lena stepped forward, her eyes locked on the crystal. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what's keeping the night alive." Kane nodded. "We destroy that, and we break their hold on the darkness." Yarrick hefted his hammer, the weight of it comforting in his hands. "Let's smash the damn thing." Before anyone could move, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and cruel. "You really thought it would be that easy?" Kane's blood ran cold. From the shadows at the far end of the room, a figure stepped into the light. It was an elf, but unlike any they had seen before. His armor was darker than night, shimmering with a malevolent energy, and his eyes burned with an unnatural, silver light. This was no ordinary soldier, this was a dark elf lord, one of the few who commanded the legions that kept humanity in chains. The elf lord smiled, a slow, wicked grin. "Did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think we would let you walk into our sacred halls and destroy the very thing that gives us power?" Kane gritted his teeth. He had expected resistance, but this was worse than he had anticipated. The elf lord was not weakened by the new moon as the others were. He stood tall, his presence alone radiating a power that made the hairs on the back of Kane's neck stand on end. Lena raised her bow, an arrow already nocked. "We'll kill you just like the others," she growled. The elf lord laughed, a sound that sent chills down Kane's spine. "Kill me? You pathetic creatures have no idea what you're dealing with." With a flick of his wrist, the elf lord unleashed a wave of dark energy that slammed into the group like a hammer. Kane was thrown back, crashing into the wall with a grunt. Lena tumbled to the ground, her bow clattering away, and Jarek's hammer slipped from his grasp as he struggled to get back to his feet. Kane's vision swam, the world spinning around him as he fought to regain his bearings. The elf lord was advancing, his hand glowing with the same dark energy that had knocked them off their feet. "You've come so far," the elf lord mocked. "But in the end, you're just like the rest. Weak. Helpless. Evo, his face twisted in pain, struggled to his feet, sword in hand. He let out a roar and charged, his blade aimed straight for the elf lord's heart. But the elf lord moved with lightning speed, sidestepping the attack and grabbing Evo by the throat. With a sneer, he lifted the soldier off the ground with one hand, his grip tightening around Evo's neck. Kane's heart sank as he watched Evo's struggles grow weaker. He had to act, and he had to act now. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Kane pushed himself to his feet. His vision blurred, but his focus was sharp. The Moonshadow Crystal, their only chance. He had to destroy it. With a grunt of pain, Kane lunged toward the crystal. The Elf Lord, distracted by Evo's struggles, didn't see him move until it was too late. Kane's hand closed around the hilt of his knife, and with a powerful thrust, he drove the blade into the base of the crystal. A piercing scream filled the chamber, not from the Elf Lord, but from the crystal itself. The air around it began to warp, the shadows swirling faster and faster as the magic within it was disrupted. The Elf Lord's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. No, he roared, dropping Evo and rushing toward Kane, but it was too late. The crystal cracked, its surface splintering like glass. The light within it flickered, then dimmed. Kane staggered back as the ground beneath his feet trembled. The air grew thick with magic, a swirling maelstrom of energy as the crystal's power was torn apart. The Elf Lord let out a roar of fury, his body convulsing as the magic that sustained him began to unravel. His form flickered, his once solid body becoming translucent, ghostly, as the power of the eternal night slipped away. Lena, bruised but determined, grabbed her bow and loosed an arrow. It struck the Elf Lord in the chest, and with a final, guttural scream, he disintegrated into a cloud of shadow and ash. The chamber grew still. The Moonshadow Crystal, now a shattered husk, lay in pieces on the ground. The light had gone out. Kane stood there, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. It was over. The crystal was destroyed. The Dark Elf's power was broken. Slowly, the first rays of dawn began to creep into the chamber. Kane turned toward the shattered doorway, watching as the sun rose for the first time in centuries. The warm light bathed the world in gold, casting away the shadows that had ruled for so long. Lena stood beside him, her eyes filled with awe. "We did it," she whispered. "The sun, it's back." Kane nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. They had won, but the victory came with a heavy cost. Many had died in the fight to reclaim the light, and the world they had once known was long gone. But now, with the darkness lifted, humanity had a chance to rebuild, to start again. Yarok limped over, his hammer resting on his shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned. I didn't think I'd ever see the sun again." Evo, nursing his injuries, gave a weak smile. "We made it. We actually made it." Kane took a deep breath, the warmth of the sun on his face filling him with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in his life, the world felt right. But even as the light returned, Kane knew that their work was far from over. The Dark Elves may have lost their power, but they were still out there, retreating into the shadows. And new threats would surely rise. He turned to his companions, his voice steady. "We've taken back the light, but we still have a lot of work to do. We need to rebuild. We need to make sure this never happens again." Lena nodded. "We'll fight for the future. For the world we've won back." Together, they walked out of the shattered citadel and into the light of a new dawn. The darkness had been vanquished, but Kane knew that as long as there were shadows, there would always be battles to fight. And he would be ready.